My grandfather was a soldier in the fight to throw over the monarchy.
I am the daughter and granddaughter of kindness and passion.
I am nurtured by the hands of God and by my grandmother.
Hello, everyone. I'm Rishi, a Do the Vote Thing influencer, and I'm thrilled to kick off tonight's event, Beyond Politics, the Power of Inclusive Civic Engagement. Now, this conversation is made possible by Do the Vote Thing, an Alabama Valley student-led GOTV narrative initiative focused on getting out the vote by leveraging culture, media, and content to educate and mobilize young voters. Now, we're joined tonight by some amazing current and former UA students and Anisha Hardy, the Executive Director of Alabama Values, to explore why inclusive civic engagement is essential and why it's often misunderstood, supporting all voices, especially those often left out. And this isn't about politics, it's about strengthening our communities. Thank you all for being here, and let's dive into an open, impactful discussion. I will now turn it over to our moderator, Anisha.
Hi, Rishi. Thank you. And I think we can label it like slight moderating this evening because I'm going to be joining the discussion with you all. I want this to be just a roundtable discussion, kind of like a fireside chat. So I definitely want to thank everyone for joining us tonight. My name is Anisha Hardy. I am the Executive Director for Alabama Values. And it is very powerful for us to just come together to discuss what true civic engagement looks like, right? When we talk about lifting up all voices, we're talking about a vision of democracy that doesn't leave anyone behind. But let's be clear, today we are facing an unfortunate reality where efforts to empower marginalized voices are being met with attacks, whether it's on DEI programs, attempts to erase our history, and just a troubling resistance to acknowledging this country's roots in anti-Blackness and oppression. And we're seeing those same tactics being used to further oppress and marginalize other vulnerable groups, whether it's the LGBTQ plus community, the immigrant community, other communities of color, right? So tonight, I want us to ground ourselves in the understanding that standing up for all voices is about building a democracy that truly honors each of us, no matter our background, right? And this isn't about, left or right. This isn't a partisan issue. It is about freedom, justice, and strength, that we gain when everyone's experiences are heard. So, erasing our history doesn't change the truth. It only silences the stories that make us who we are, right? So we're here to build a movement, push towards a society where each of us have the power to really shape our future and where no voice or no history is erased. So again, I want to thank everyone for joining us. And at this time, I want to bring on our guests this evening. I'm super excited to have everyone. We have Rishi, our Do the Vote Thing influencer, who is also a pre-law student at the University of Alabama. We also have Hill Goodwin, a Do the Vote Thing influencer. Hill is a senior at the University of Alabama studying political science. And then we have Claire Basie. Claire is a freshman at the University of Alabama from Mobile, Alabama, majoring in aerospace engineering. And then we have Shania Daughtry, who hauls from Lakewood, California, and is deeply rooted in voting rights advocacy. Shania considers herself a shameless politico and author. She is a two-time graduate from the University of Alabama, where she attained her BA in political science and also her master's in public administration. So again, thank you all for joining me this evening to have this, fireside chat. So let's kick it off, with you all, Rishi and Hill, our Do the Vote Thing influencers. So can you tell us, can you talk a little bit about why you decided to join an initiative like Do the Vote Thing? And, what has the response been like, as you have been promoting civic engagement within your campus community, and what challenges have you faced?
I can start. So I joined Do the Vote Thing because as an immigrant, I experienced a very unique perspective on the importance of voting. For a long time, my family and I watched as decisions were made that affected us, yet we didn't have a voice in those processes. once we finally gained the right to vote, I understood firsthand how vital it is to be part of that democratic process. I mean, that realization inspired me to take on this personal goal of helping others recognize the importance of voting and making their voices heard. Um, at the University of Alabama, promoting civic engagement for marginalized communities can somewhat be met with mixed responses. Many students are excited to learn and get involved, but there's also a perception that supporting these communities and helping marginalized group is inherently a leftist agenda. Some people just assume that because they identify as Republican or have certain ideals that we're automatically in opposition, and then which makes an open conversation about civic engagement a lot more challenging. And that's just what I've seen as I've done interviews and talked to people promoting our ideals. I've just seen a lot of people feel like they can't even talk to us because of the party or because of where they stand.
Yeah, no, thank you for sharing. Hill, do you want to chime in?
Yeah, I think aside from just my genuine interest in politics, I think coming into the year, I wanted to do something where I felt like I was making some sort of an impact or even a difference. And I think about, my future career and just my values going forward. I think making a positive change in our society is something that I really value. It's something I really care about. And I think what we're doing here, I think it's really important. We're not pushing a certain political ideology. We're pushing just our civic right to vote and be known in the electoral process. And I would say in regards to reaching out to people on campus, I think me and Rishi both experienced a lot of people not really wanting to talk to us. Anytime politics or anything remotely political is mentioned, I think people get a little scared and they're like, I'm not doing that. And so, that was definitely a challenge we dealt with, but also we also spoke to a lot of really interested students that had a lot of really cool things to say. And then we had a couple events, and Rishi did a really good job scheduling the film event we did. And I think that was the thing that we did that, gave us the ability to make politics and civic engagement kind of interesting to the people, to the students.
Yeah. So I want to bring in the other voices on the on the call. Um, you know, just hearing you all's experience, I mean, it's not right. It's not uncommon for civic engagement efforts to include, and to center marginalized voices, right? It's also, it's also not uncommon for this to be misunderstood or miscategorized. This is also a pattern that we're seeing not just, in our state, but just across the country. Especially with, current, like I said, current pushes to limit programs that center, these voices, or initiatives to erase certain aspects of our history. Like, why do you think, efforts to include and center, voices of underserved and underrepresented communities are often seen as political or partisan? What impact does this have on you all, who are the inheritors of, the future of this country and the next generation of change agents? Like, how, what impact does this have on your civic engagement work? So that's a two-part question. We can start with the first one. Like, why do you think efforts to include, and center, these voices are often seen as political or partisan? And then we can start there and then go into, what impacts, do you see this having on your work? And anyone can chime in there.
Yeah, I definitely think that civic engagement and political involvement and awareness is the bedrock of what makes a democracy a true democracy. And the system that was centered and founded on patriarchal values and oppression and codifying white supremacy, because that's what it is, and that's what we're seeing in real time. It's meant to do that. The system is meant to ostracize and marginalize and disenfranchise. I'm Dr. Seuss today. What do you know? But at the end of the day, civic engagement is the power that every individual has at the end of the day. And when it comes to historically marginalized groups, it's vital for civic participation to happen. There's a quote by an anthropologist, Margaret Mead, and she said, we should never depend on government or institutions to solve any problem. All social movements are founded and guided and motivated and seen through the passion of individuals. And that's simply what civic engagement is. It is constantly pushing against the status quo, because if you don't, then the status quo is what's going to remain. People like Hill and I, who are different, or Rishi or Claire and I, who are different, they want to marginalize voices, especially, when we don't, when they want that system to be the way it is. And so when it comes to civic engagement, it's a civic duty to push back against what's been pushed onto us for centuries. And that is all by design. And so I think that's why when it comes to, marginalized voices viewed as political or partisan, it's not. It's just pushing against a system that was not made for people who look like me to, have an opportunity to run for a Senate office, or see a woman running, a Black woman, and then a Southeast Asian Black woman running for the highest office in the land, or seeing Ketanji Brown Jackson, the first African American woman, serve on the highest court in the land. That is literally what they don't want. That's why you have, Arizona burning like places like Arizona where ballot boxes are being burned. Alabama, no early voting. I'm from California. I never have a problem to vote, but I'm in a state now where my friends have to drive 14 hours to just cast their ballot. So that is literally by design. And that is also a form of voter suppression and oppression in general. So civic engagement is one of the best ways to change that.
Yeah, no, I agree. And since we're quoting folks, let me just quote Audre Lorde real quick. I mean, because there's a quote, from Audre Lorde where, she really emphasizes the need to embrace and uplift like our diverse voices in it. And it says, it is not our differences that divides us. It is our inability to recognize, accept, and celebrate those differences. So, I don't see us moving forward until we, do that. Yeah, Claire, you want to chime in?
I can, as someone who was basically born and raised in Alabama, I think the early voting thing is actually really crazy. And this is my first election. I know I'm younger than people here. But I think there is so much that Americans do not know about the government itself and what they can do to come together as a people. I think with this program or with this organization, it helps bring awareness to what people do not know and how they can be better, not even as politicians or as people, voting in an election, but as Americans helping to spread awareness or just do better rights for people of color, like Shania said. I mean, the whole system is based off of discrimination and a tawdry past. I mean, there's only so much you can do if people aren't willing to come together on that.
Yeah. Yeah. We have to one, to acknowledge the past, one, so that we won't continue to repeat it. And so that, we can move forward. Rishi and Hill, did you want to chime in before we go to the second part of that question?
Yeah, I think what Shania mentioned about the status quo, I think if we do look at history, just how slow changes occurred in this country and how much, like modern day, a lot of people like to kind of distance themselves from history, but all the progress has been made. Now we're finally able to kick our legs up and stop, but that's just not true. It's a continuous fight, and history has shown us just how hard it is to disrupt that status quo and create the change, and how slow of a process it is. And what has also been very obvious, especially lately, is how quickly that progress can be taken back. We've seen from court cases being overturned to certain parts of history being, not allowed to be taught in school. I think these ideas, and then that's done on purpose to kind of stop that change and slow down progress, and to keep the current status quo where it is, because again and again, we've seen how people are so afraid to have that status quo disrupted. And so, yeah, I think that was a great point made.
Oh,
Yeah, I
sorry.
like a lot about what Rishi said about the process of change being slow. When you said that question, I immediately thought of just women in general making up, their makeup in Congress, like how many women are in Congress. And I mean, I think it was like 1920 when women were given the right to vote, and yet they still make up not that many of the percentage of Congress. Like, I think roughly it's like 50-50, maybe a little more women in the population, and they're still not equally being represented in Congress. So I think the process of change is just so slow and so gradual. And so it's really important that we just continue going on that path.
Yeah, I'm wondering, like how does this impact just understanding this, right? Understanding how the efforts that you're doing are pushing against the status quo of society, and how things is being perceived as partisan and politicized, right? Things that should not be partisan, like access to the ballot shouldn't be a partisan issue. Countering voter suppression shouldn't be a partisan issue. Equality shouldn't be a partisan issue. These are very human, like issues, right? But understanding, just Rishi, Rishi and Hill, you all's experience even doing this on campus, receiving the pushback. But just, understanding this, how does this impact you all's approach to civic engagement and civic education? And this is a question for everyone, right? So like, how does this impact your work?
I think it's definitely important that when you do this type of work, civic engagement, grassroots activism, the like, it's important to include everybody, because it's going to take a rainbow coalition of people to push that needle of change forward. You can't isolate, I love my people, I love being Black, I love being a Black woman, but my network stretches beyond that. You have to be able to reach across the aisle. And that's the polarization that we're seeing currently. It's the lack of, stewardship. It's the lack of willingness to reach across the aisle. It's the lack of understanding or even empathy to a certain extent as well. And certain issues that we see, healthcare, reproductive justice, educational disparities, tackling those, healthcare disparities, like gerrymandering, that should cracking and packing, that should not be partisan issues, but they are. And that's really just politics and everything. But that also speaks to the larger point of maintaining that status quo, preserving what is left of the patriarchy. And that is every person who, that is that's the white fear. I'm going to be blatant. That's white fear at its finest. Seeing a Black woman like Kamala Harris ascend to an office, having to take orders essentially from what they're not used to. So when it comes to civic engagement, it is a push that is required from everybody from all walks of life, because it's just not one demographic of people who should be fighting, and when it comes to civic engagement and political advocacy, for generations, it's been specific populations carrying that weight of preserving what is left of democracy, carrying that mantle, dying in the streets for it. And it should be beyond that. Everybody should be willing to get their hands dirty when it comes to preserving the pillars of what we claim to be this glamorous 254-year-old experiment that our founders curated. And it's no longer looking like that. It is the Great Divide. It's violent, it's scary, it's exclusionary, and it's turning to, a communist country when everybody doesn't have a say. And that's not how it should be at the end of the day. And so that's so important about having conversations like this and having diverse voices. Diverse voices are so important because every perspective is important when you are pushing for change, when you want those glass ceilings to continue to break, when you want to stop hearing that an Asian American woman or a Native American man or Indian woman is the first to do something. I'm tired of hearing a Black woman being the first for something. It's 2024. I'm tired of it, actually. And so that is the importance of civic engagement at its finest, at its core. Nothing is possible without the outpour of community and gathering in communal spaces, especially when not like-minded individuals, but people who are willing to push for change, even though it may be different approaches.
Yeah. So Rishi, I know, we're talking about how does this impact your approaches? Like I said, you all have been dealing with this in real time. I think this event is also like a shift in strategy, right? Like it was a result of, so if you all can kind of like share like collectively, like, like how does this impact your approach to civic engagement and voter education and outreach?
To start it off, yeah, I agree that the idea of politicizing everything is just, you're kind of weaponizing that, because it's a lot easier to politicize and associate a certain idea with a party and then be like, I don't like the party, then go and say, I don't like this group of people, or I don't want these group of people to rise up. So, in order to de-weaponize it, what we've had to do is, be very careful with vocabulary. And I think a great point was brought up about the idea of being inclusive, because it's a lot harder to be against everybody. And so, if you are to bring up, ideas like voting advocacy, and you don't bring up, yeah, like you're inclusive towards everybody in the community, and that way it's a lot harder to reject this idea and kind of go against the idea. And it's also a lot harder to politicize this idea, because if you're including everybody, it's very hard to be like, this is, one party's idea or one party's concept. And it makes it a lot easier to have these type of conversations, because everybody feels like they feel included. And I think that's a big part of what we're trying to do here on such a diverse campus. Is we can't go out there on the streets and like only fight for one group of people, because then what happens is a whole other group of people is shunned away from this conversation and shunned away from being educated. And so if you are able to include everybody in that conversation, especially on a diverse university like this, I think that's the best chance to grow as a community.
Yeah. So I'm wondering, we've been talking a little bit about just the historical like context, right? I don't think we really dived into it. Because I do think it's important, like, and thank you, Shania, for bringing, I often call it the elephant in the room. When we say white supremacy or we say male patriarchy, it becomes the elephant in the room, right? And it's not. And I want to be clear, I'm not talking about the mainstream definition of white supremacy. Where one person, we're talking about white people. No, I'm not. Because that provides a room for someone to just sidestep. Well, no, that's not me. No, I'm talking about white supremacy as a system, as an ideology, as a culture that is embedded within all of our social institutions, and it shows up, in that way. Like, so I want to just pose a question to you, Shania. Like, how does this historical exclusion of marginalized voices shape the current perceptions like of the work? When we think about, we even now we hear a lot of disinformation around the immigrant community. When it comes to, we see how disinformation is being weaponized to distill fear and division, especially ahead of the election, right? So like, how does the historical exclusion of marginalized voices in civic spaces, and just that part alone, I do want to make a point that historically we have groups from the time that they were born, i.e. white people, were able to vote. It was their right. It was passed down from generation to generation, right? And then we have groups who have a very punctuated relationship, with civic engagement, meaning they were born and could not vote. It wasn't something that was passed down generation to generation. And so when you think about initiatives like this, like Do the Vote thing, and you think about organizations, the grassroots and civic organizations that are coming together and in a very communal way, ensuring that that knowledge gap is closed for these communities and that they understand the power that they have and how to use the power of the vote, how to be civically engaged and involved, right? And so when we think about just the historical exclusion, like of marginalized voices from civic spaces, like how do we see this shaping, the current perception around nonpartisan initiatives like ours that focus on inclusivity, and just like the misinfo and disinfo, centered around that?
Yeah. So especially during my undergrad tenure at UA, being in, being president of nonpartisan organizations like Ignite National UA, being an active member of nonpartisan organizations like, the Andrew Goodman Foundation and Return My Vote and UA Vote Everywhere. The perception, I think it's meant to instill fear. I think when you think of even I want to use the word propaganda because I think that is the best way to describe the form of rhetoric that we see around nonpartisan initiatives. For example, a good kind of timestamp when it comes to the historical exclusion, the best way for people to continue to be ignorant, and not in a bad way, just you don't know, there's a such thing as blissful ignorance, there's a such thing as just literally not knowing. And the first thing I think of is DEI, the erasure of quite literally Black and Indigenous people's history, pivotal history that contributes to how the perceptions kind of permeate over into today and what we're seeing. And so I think when it comes to strategic, like the attacks on DEI, diversity, equity, inclusion, I never understood that attack when it came to, what was it called? I can't even think. A critical race theory, and how that it got entirely warped by, a specific side of the aisle. But that is, like you said, misinformation, disinformation. They're weaponizing information, and it becomes dangerous, but it also becomes exclusionary. It also becomes a reason to exclude marginalized voices from different spaces, especially when it comes to organizations that are trying to push against a certain agenda, not in a partisan way, but in a nonpartisan way that includes all voices from different spectrums. And I think that's when it comes to the historical context of excluding marginalized voices, they didn't want the voices there to begin with, because then it begins to rattle the cage. Then it becomes, okay, well, how else can we strategically and legally and, pragmatically exclude voices that weren't meant to be here in the first place? But we're here now. And we're screaming from the mountaintop. So when it comes to not knowing your history and purposefully banning books, purposefully trying to get rid of organizations like the D9, which I'm a part of, and what they were founded on, social action, community service, civic engagement, that is just one aspect of kind of that historical precipice of what certain people around the country, leaders that are supposed to be leading us, are trying to do, not out of spite, but out of fear of being erased, not being heard, their voices then becoming the minority. And that's the real fear. The people who have been in power so long now becoming the minority, which is statistically a real fact. And so when you put things in perspective like that, when you kind of look at the grand scheme of everything that is methodical, from overturning cases like Chevron, overturning pieces of legislation or like Roe v. Wade, putting people in the positions of power to make sure that certain things are overturned, it is historically pertinent to recognize the weaponization of misinformation, disinformation, and also the power in propaganda, which we're seeing all the way up. It's Election Day Eve, everybody. We've been seeing it for months, and that's what it is. And so once you wake up and realize everything has a rhyme and a reason, that wasn't that wasn't on accident. Like, they just don't want us to know history, and it's important for everybody. Me, Rishi, Claire, Hill, not knowing that history, because I bet you, not to be like that, white people know the history, and that's why they want so hard to exclude it. They know what they know, what happens historically, or what has happened. And this isn't to blame a whole population, but it's just the facts of history. And that is the danger when you try to exclude that or erase what has been going on. That impacts civic engagement now, and we see that now. Spaces at Alabama Values organizations are getting attacked. 2020, we saw that. That was rampant. We see it now. And so everything is not accidental. It is actually strategically and methodically implemented because they want to preserve something that they've had for centuries. So I thought that was verbose, but it really, you needed the full context to understand.
Yeah. No, I appreciate the context. I welcome other voices
Yeah,
into the
something Shania said really stood out to me, and it kind of made me think, like, the idea of blissful ignorance. Because I try not to think that some of the people that sort of let these court cases being overturned, they allow for it, they're okay with it. I think a lot of people, they choose not to be uncomfortable. And I think in order to achieve that change, we kind of have to force a little bit of uncomfortability on them, and they've got to understand what is going on. Just, people get dealing with a lot of, tough things. And so I think just a big thing I thought of was, I think bad actors rely on the silence. I think people that wish to do harm for their benefit, they rely on people not to listen and not to look and not to expect things. So that's sort of my takeaway from what you said.
yeah. Yeah.
You ate, Hill. That was good. I like that a lot. They expect us not to listen or to learn. I like that. They expect us to be silent. You're absolutely correct.
Yeah. Yeah. That's why, one of the approaches that we take as an organization is like reclaiming our narrative and storytelling and centering the voices of those directly impacted by these unfair policies and practices. Claire, Rishi, did you want to chime in here? Okay. Well, so speaking of reclaiming our, narrative, or just, I'm wondering, how can, like, in what ways, how can we work to reframe the narrative so that efforts focused on inclusivity and representation are seen as universal values, not political stances? Like, and let's use our radical imagination. Like, in what ways, like, how can we work to reframe and just counter this narrative? I know, right? Push you in like a problem solving, like.
I think information is key here. I think people are a lot more likely to act on something when they are able to see firsthand kind of the effects of certain legislations and certain bills and how it affects people directly. When I was 14, I lived near the border of Texas, and it was seeing firsthand kind of the immigration issues and seeing, friends of families and, or sorry, yeah, friends being split up at the border, and, just kind of seeing that firsthand really motivates you. So I think information is key here. And then also providing shared benefits for communities and kind of showing them how certain processes can help everybody in the community would be the best way to negate that idea that this is one party's idea. If we were to just kind of show how, if we were to act a certain way, everybody in the community would benefit.
Anyone else? Are you all still using your imagination?
Can you put the question back up?
Yeah, no. How can we work to reframe the narrative so that, these type of efforts that focus on inclusivity and centering marginalized voices and representation, that is seen as something that's not political, like it's universal, like it's a human value, it's something we should all be striving for.
Yeah, no, I hate to be Debbie Downer about it, but there are people and people like this, people here, the work that an organization like this constantly does. Like, I really think election season is where everybody comes out the woodworks and be like, try to be activists and advocates and stuff like that. When it comes to literally preserving and having hopefully more rights than our parents had, because as of right now, I have less rights, than my mom did. And she's a boomer, I think. She's something. But I have less rights than she did in a state like Alabama, but I'm from a progressive state. I don't feel like anything has been stripped away from me. But I feel the effects here, being in a Republican dominated state as a woman, and even more so, a Black woman. And I fear for certain things, but that narrative, when it comes to, focus on inclusivity, it's difficult when the other side doesn't want to listen, when the other side is not receptive and not seeing it as, partisan stances or political stances. But everything now realistically has become politicized. It seems like every issue is politicized, and that's for a larger agenda. But I wish there was a definitive answer to give outside of just constant direct democracy action. That's protesting, that's going to your state legislature, your representatives, presenting bills on the floor, going to your city council, person's meeting, recognizing the importance of local and municipal elections. That engagement of direct democracy, that is how you kind of reframe the network to a certain extent, other than kind of this granular approach. Like, not everything has to be big. We look at movements like the Civil Rights Movement. Essentially, that movement was incrementally built. It just over time became something that is now idolized and kind of put on this beacon place, as it should be. But when it comes to what we can do as individuals, it's the little incremental, engagement mechanisms that we do. Are you calling your representative? Are you calling your congressperson? Are you going to city council meetings? Are you putting out content? Are you raising awareness? That is how you essentially change the narrative and kind of move away from it being political stances. And you have to frame it in a way that people can digest it. Do you want your wife bleeding out on the floor because she couldn't get an abortion? Period, point blank. Do you want your kid to go into school and be shot up? Period, point blank, with an AR-15? And because if it happens to them, then they want to take things personal. Then they want to get involved. And you have to start framing it in real life scenarios, because a girl in Texas just died from sepsis because she could not get a DNC, a procedure that has been done for generations. She died. And so when you frame it like that, when you put it in perspective, I think that is the only way to reframe the narratives, when you make it personal. Because politics is personal. I'm sorry, it is personal. And these issues are personal because they affect everyday people. They affect me, they affect you, they Hill, Rishi, everybody on this call is affected by them. Because we either have a niece in our life, a woman or a man in our life, a partner, a cousin. These are all realistic scenarios. And you have to frame it like, do you want a president who is going to give police immunity, and, for example, your partner's Black? He can get shot. She can get shot. Like, that is the scope of how you have to put things. That's how I talk to everybody in my life. That is, I think, is the only pragmatic way when it comes to reframing that network. And people never want to think it's them until they're at the brunt of it or the receiving end of it. And that's a harsh reality, but I think that's what it is.
Yeah, no, thank you for that. And and I want to say, although we are definitely a nonpartisan organization, we definitely encourage folks to look at the issues that are impacting them and look at the policies that they are aligned with. Like, we often say that, we're a grassroots communication organization, and we advocate. Alabama Values advocates for pro-democracy values and policies, and making sure people are educated around, these issues, right? And I think when we are thinking about, truly, shifting these narratives, you made a couple of points, and and I want to kind of just build, upon those. Like, I think that we definitely need to continue, like we're doing on this call tonight, emphasize that inclusivity and representation, it moves beyond like partisanship and political labels, right? It is personal. It is a fundamental principle. It sits right at our kitchen table. and everyone deserves it, right? And so looking at inclusivity in this work as a collective effort, not just something that's limited to certain groups or agenda. And that's going to take challenging, like you said, just continuously challenging the idea that only specific people or communities benefit from representation. Like we have to start doing the work to, or continue to do the work to reframe it as something that strengthens all of us. And then also, exposing the systems that limit these voices. We talked about white supremacy. We talked about male patriarchal structures. We talked about the historical context. And I think, just continuously actively, just naming the systems that are actively working to limit, participation, whether it's, historical, institutional, cultural, just acknowledging them and moving beyond acknowledging them and talking about ways how we can, reimagine these systems and break down these systems and barriers. And then I think one of the most important ones is building an understanding and education around this. Like education and community organizing, are key. These are going to be it's key tools to reshaping how people think about about society and inclusivity and equity. And I think by connecting with people, at a grassroots level through discussions like this or storytelling, that we can build this shared understanding. I've been saying this all week that, when we think about the power of knowledge, and how communities are kept disempowered by creating barriers to information about the power that they have. And so just really being intentional about educating and closing the knowledge gap, and just standing 10 toes down and just claiming that participation is a right, it is not a privilege. Right. And so I think you all hit on, Shania, you hit on some important points. I definitely want to welcome, Rishi and Hill and Claire to kind of chime in on that last question about how we can, how can we work to reframe the narrative so that efforts that focus on, inclusivity and representation is seen as universal and not a political stance. And we might not have all the answers tonight. But just as we're asking people to join us in reimagining, I'm challenging you all to reimagine live in front of everybody.
I believe that we can't work to reframe the narrative until people stop believing that rights is an option and not a necessity for people here, whether it's civil rights or LGBTQ plus IA rights, or women's rights, voting rights. Women should be able to do whatever they want with their body. It's also a matter of separation of church and the government. There's so many personal affiliations with how people believe, and it's affecting the way that citizens are treated in America. And that building on education is so important because we can't move forward until everyone knows how can we go about it. Sorry. But the inclusivity, even with the civil rights movement, it is about white supremacy and that broken system that the government was built on. They're scared of the pushback, whether it was Black Lives Matter or civil rights. They don't want to be ostracized for their actions. They want to be able to comfortable in their position and keep it that way. And the more we move forward, it seems like we're going back in time. And I feel like voter education and voter advocacy is so important because we cannot afford to go back in time unless you are a white man. Even if you are a white woman, they're wanting to revoke our rights. It's not something that we can debate on. If you are a person that is living, you deserve to be a person in the country without having to pay $40,000 for pregnancy or having to move countries just to be able to get a baby that you may not be able to hold. Be able to be happy with who you are. It is a ridiculous concept to process that we're moving backwards in a time where it seems that all we need is progress. The government is such a strong, obviously, this is a democracy. Government is what America is based off of, but representation in the government is so important, whether it is an Asian woman or a black woman or even a gay man in Congress or the House, at all. It is important for us to have a voice, or we won't be able to live the way we want or live at all.
Sorry, just to add, I agree with everything Claire was saying and about those rights and how it shouldn't be a debate. It should be universal. But the country right now is so divided where I think what we need a lot of is discourse. And because like I was talking about beforehand, how I reached out to people on campus and they, instantly they were like, oh, I'm voting a certain way. So there's no way you and I could have this conversation. There's no way we can even, try and attempt to meet in the middle. And so creating, and that's the polarization of these issues that has occurred in this country. So one of the best ways I think to kind of bring everybody back and make everybody understand that we're living in the same nation, and it's not one party or the other. It's one nation, and the best way to do that is through, like, and I hate to use the term safe spaces, but like, like places where people can come into and have these conversations without feeling attacked and without feeling like you're pushing certain agendas, and to kind of bring everybody back to understanding that it's, one nation. Even though certain issues shouldn't be up for debate, country is so divided where we kind of had to work with what we're given and try to work with everybody and, create these safe environments.
So I want to go to, I know we have some questions. So I want to go to the chat for questions. And we can start with, I know we have one, we have Soul, Montana, that is asking, what do you believe are the differences between political and universal values? And to what extent does one reach into the other? So what do you believe are the differences between political and universal values, and to what extent does one reach into the other? And I can definitely kick us off with that question since I mentioned those two things. Just at its core, when we talk about political values, it refers, of course, political values, like, we think about, beliefs and priorities that align with a specific, political ideology or party or, political agenda. And, these values oftentimes, they reflect, a stance on issues such as, economic policy, social regulations, and they align with partisan identities, whether it's conservative, liberal, progressive, what have you. And then we have, on the other hand, we have universal values. And these are ideally principles that are widely recognized as just fundamental to human dignity and our overall well-being, regardless of political affiliation. This includes concepts like justice, equality, respect, human rights, freedom. And these universal like values, they kind of transcend specific political or cultural contexts and are often seen as like, this is just for the collective good, right? And so, in short, while political values often divide along party or ideological lines, universal values, they should, aim to unite and focus on the basic rights and needs that benefits everyone, regardless of your personal, beliefs or backgrounds. So again, like fundamental human dignity, whether it's, right to health care, whether it's, right to equity or having a just system. And when we look at, across, partisan lines, unfortunately right now, we are seeing certain things that should be universal values being highly politicized along party lines, and that does not benefit us, as a whole. So I want to welcome some of some of the students to kind of chime in and guests to chime in on that.
Does anybody want to start or no? Okay.
And what I immediately thought when I saw that question was, and I'm not meaning to throw a dig at a specific group, but but I think the existence of empathy, I think that plays heavily into your political and your universal values. And I think that basically, if you're empathetic towards all groups of people, you're probably going to be politically on a similar plane. You're going to benefit those people and all people. So, I mean, that's sort of just what I thought of immediately, was just the existence of empathy.
In your response, he'll just nudge me to answer the latter part of that question. I think the latter part of the question just said, and to what extent does one reach into the other? And I do want to point out that that just like the political and universal values, like they do intersect and influence each other. But through the extent, like the overlap depends on the issue, context, and motivation behind it. So when you talk about empathy, right? So when we think about political values shaping universal values or interpretations, our political ideologies often shape the way universal values, for example, like justice and freedom, is interpreted and applied in policy. For instance, different political groups may claim to support freedom, but define it differently. One side may view it as a personal freedom from government intervention, while the other may see it as freedom to access resources like healthcare or education. And I think political values influence which universal values are prioritized and how they are framed, in public discourse. And so that goes back to like the point that you pointed out, Hill, empathy. I just wanted to make sure I answered the latter part of that question.
Yeah, definitely. I think the differences between political and universal values are getting muddied. And that's scary, because the things that I believe were mentioned earlier, like universal values, just equality, justice, equal access, equity, that is becoming muddied. And to what extent does one reach into the other when one is rooted in, strategic and purposeful ostracization and marginalization, and when it becomes hate filled, a lot of the rhetoric that we are hearing is spewing from a place of exclusion. People wanting certain people to be excluded, certain voices to still remain silent, and I think it's really difficult now to really delineate between what are political and universal values. I think whether you're Democrat, Republican, a moderate, conservative, liberal, there's certain things that used to be kind of an overarching, this is the universal values. Everybody wants justice for everybody. Everybody should want equal access at the ballot. Everybody should have an opportunity not to pull themselves up by their bootstraps, but essentially everybody should be an equal playing field. And that over the years that I've been alive and actually been able to comprehend what's been going on, it has sadly become more muddied. And I'm sorry I can't give you a better answer, but I will leave you with the question of a universal value is a hot topic right now. Reproductive justice and autonomy, women having autonomy over their body. I think the most profound question I've ever heard asked to a current Supreme Court justice was, name a law that specifically regulates a man's body. He couldn't give one because there isn't one. So when you come to universal values, I think of reproductive justice and access to equitable healthcare as a universal value. I believe both parties used to think the same thing. So I leave you with food for thought when it comes about universal values and specifically autonomy over our own bodies and thinking about, certain things like that. Certain issues have become muddied and it's no longer, I don't believe the universal values are just universal anymore because I feel like everybody now has a different definition of what justice is or what justice should be. And that's not right, in my opinion. So I hope I gave you a little bit of an answer, but that's what it is.
Yeah, no, thank you. I think we have another question in the chat um, from Robert Hunter. And it says, how do we organize out of gerrymandering if it is mathematically made to do that and the Supreme Court says it is legal? Look, Robert is thinking about about all the ways that these systems are being upheld. And I know, Shania, I know you mentioned something about gerrymandering, cracking and packing. I also, would definitely give some feedback on this question. And I think keyword, organizing is gerrymandering, right? A lot of I do want to point out that a lot of these systems are working the way they were meant to work, right? So I think it's challenging, but it's not impossible. Although gerrymandering relies, the way that it crafts district lines by population numbers, all of that, there are strategies to mitigate its effect through grassroots organizing, policy reform, and also civic engagement. I think, educating communities about the impact of gerrymandering can build momentum. When people really understand how their vote is diluted, they are more likely to engage in actions to counteract it. We saw that, Alabama, this is a historical election. You all go and vote tomorrow. We are, we have now a new congressional district. Definitely encourage everyone to get out and vote. But this district came about, it was a way to, during the census, we saw that, Alabama, was now due a congressional district to give Black voters, additional, power, right? And so during that time, during that fight, we saw grassroots organizations, and campaigns and initiatives where the community really showed up, and started to understand, right? And then also definitely building, coalitions to advocate for redistricting reform. Also, litigation is a way to counter that, because although we have some losses in the Supreme Court, we also have some wins, with the Alabama redistricting case being one, and then using the data and mapping tools as well. I think Robert mentioned that gerrymandering is mathematically, by design. It can also be used to create, to expose districts that can count, like tools like the Princeton Gerrymandering Project and organizations like Common Cause. They provide data analysis to illustrate the unfairness of these maps and use the resources to organize and, build a case for reform and litigation. But I will stop there to see if you all want to chime in on that question. Or if that answer was enough. Okay. Let's see. I do think we may have time for one more question and then closing remarks. So let's take one more question. And I think it comes from Man Broughton. There we go. I agree that the conflation of universal and political values is worrisome. What do y'all think about? What do y'all think brought this about? Have we passed a point of no return? I'm going to kick that to you all to kind of, what do you all think? And actually, I think this question kind of rounds us out with how we started, right? So, thank you, Man. I mean, that's I like that's your name, but thank you, Man.
I don't think we're past the point of no return. I think this polarization, and I don't want to throw any names out, it's been slow, but it drastically through one presidency and one election we've seen just both parties be pushed to the, both sides. So just it happened so quickly, which makes me think that we have not passed the point of no return. I think voting, educating, and then talking amongst each other is the best way to come back from this polarization and from this um, conflation of universal and political values. So best thing we can do is talk amongst one of each other.
Okay. Well, did anyone else want to chime in? And if not, I do want to say that to Rishi's point, that this is not this than just this has evolved over time, right, due to several key historical, social, and cultural factors. Many universal values such as freedom, justice, and equality have long been like the center of social movements and political debates. Whether it's the civil rights movement, the women's suffrage movement, groups seeking universal rights have often had to engage politically to achieve their goals. And these values became associated with movements that challenged the status quo of society. And they were increasingly linked to specific political ideologies, even though they were rooted in universal human rights. And then we have over the recent decades where the political polarization of political parties has deepened, not just in our country, but other countries, leading parties to adopt more, distinct, to adopt more I guess distinct and often opposing stances on social and moral issues. And then and I would be remiss if I did not point out the role that the media plays. Media and framing. The media plays a significant role in framing issues, often portraying universal values as partisan or ideological battles. Covering coverage of issues like healthcare, education, and social justice frequently links, frequently linking them to specific political stances, creating this perception that values like access to healthcare or justice reform is inherently political rather than universal. So, the media framing reinforces the idea that fundamental rights are political issues rather than, shared human concerns. We see that. And then the legislative battles and policy debates. We now have states who have these, party supermajorities. And so where one party controls the state legislature. In Alabama, it is the Republican Party. And, much more, many states across the South is the Republican Party. And when universal values becomes topics of policy and legislation, they often get entangled with political ideology, whether it's laws surrounding immigration, healthcare, and voting rights are rooted in universal values, but they become contentious political issues as parties advocate for different approaches or try to follow a national narrative. And these type of debates blur the lines between what is universal and what is partisan, making it appear that the issues that we were talking about, which is equity, fairness, justice, it belongs to one party or the other. And so, and then just a couple of few like cultural narratives and identity politics plays a role. I mentioned media. I can't leave out social media and its algorithms and how it creates these echo chambers and filter bubbles for people to amplify content that engages and often divides users. And so we see this value-based discussions online are frequently polarized, pushing users towards more extreme points or framing issues as us versus them context. And so I think, to just kind of wrap up there, I think the intertwining of political ideology and universal values is definitely a product of historical struggles and media framing and policy debates, and also, just modern social dynamics. I think, as we just even leading into this call, we talked, the name of this discussion is Beyond, Politics. Like, what does inclusive civic engagement look like? And I think, as we discuss here this evening, I think we all came to a consensus or understanding the roots of this, we can better work to reclaim the universal values, these universal values as nonpartisan, and foundational principles for everyone, fostering a more inclusive and just and unified society. So with that, I want to welcome you all to kind of give closing remarks. If there's something that you just want to, as we gear up for tomorrow, for Tuesday, for the election, what are what are some words or just some encouragements that you want to give folks and encourage them to get out and vote? Remember to keep it nonpartisan. And just what are some ways, what are some final closing words that you just want to share with folks?
Vote like your life depends on it, because it does. That's it.
I know there's a lot of momentum coming into this election, but politics doesn't end after an election. So just make sure to stay active, keep educating yourselves, keep reading the news, and kind of just knowing what's happening. Because, like Will mentioned, they're hoping that we don't speak up. They're hoping that we don't educate ourselves. They're hoping that we're not aware. So don't after the election, don't sit back and, you try your best. You got to keep on reading. You got to keep on talking amongst each other and just keep staying politically active and keep educating yourselves.
Yes. I think here we're closing. We're giving folks an encouraging phrase, word, as we head back. As we get ready to head to the polls tomorrow. So what do you want to tell the folks as they head to the polls?
Yeah, just go out, get out to vote, use the voter toolbox that we have been pushing on our website, and just exercise your civic duty.
Awesome. Claire, we're going to kick it to you.
I apologize for being pink, but as this is my first election, I hope that everyone votes with proper knowledge of policies and character of whoever they choose to vote for, and be safe and have a good one.
Awesome. And as you all go to the polls, I want to encourage you to visit Defend the Ballot. We are in election protection season. You have support organizations that are making sure that you have access to the ballot. So visit defendtheballot.org. If you have any issues at the polls, or if you have any issues at the polls, please, contact the election protection hotline. You can call that at 1-866-OUR-VOTE. Also, if you need a ride to the polls, definitely you can call 1-866-4AL-VOTE or 334-223-4983. I encourage you all to stay tapped in with Alabama values and do the vote thing. You can visit us on the web. You can also follow us on social media on all platforms at Al Values. Thank you so much for joining us.
My grandfather was a soldier in the false fight to throw over the monarchy.
I am the daughter and granddaughter of kindness and passion.
I am nurtured by the hands of God and by my grandmother.